We're getting an inside look now inside convicted killer Bryan Kohberger's first ever talk with police. Kohberger admitted he watched the news coverage of the Idaho 4 murders. He described a fascination with criminology, demanded answers from detectives, and even asked for his mom. We're breaking down the 9 most eerie revelations from convicted killer Bryan Kohberger's first conversation with police. This is Scandal, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Gillespie. Before I get into today's story, I want to make a quick announcement. Law&Crime needs your help. We want to create something new for our viewers, something that you'll love and enjoy. We want to make sure that what we create is based on your opinion and your voice. So we've created a short survey to get your feedback, and we'll be selecting 10 people at random who took the survey to get a free Law&Crime t-shirt. If you want your voice to be heard, please check out the survey and let us know your thoughts. The link is in the description and pinned comment. All right, back to the story. Today, we're talking about convicted killer Bryan Kohberger's very first conversation with police, and we're learning new details about what exactly happened after Kohberger's arrest nearly 3 years ago. When Bryan Kohberger first spoke to police, he confirmed he knew about the University of Idaho quadruple murders. He commented on his arrest and even asked detectives what they knew and what questions they wanted to ask him. All these details are coming out now because of Kohberger's recent conviction in the quadruple murder that shocked the nation. On November 13th, 2022, the bodies of Kaylee Gonzalez, Madison Mogan, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin were found at 1122 King Road in Moscow, Idaho, not far from the University of Idaho campus. The details of the murders are shocking. Some of them were so brutally attacked that they were unrecognizable when police found them. For those of you who've been following the case from the very beginning, you know there wasn't an arrest for weeks. There were updates, though. Investigators released the now infamous sketch of the suspect. They released photos of a white Hyundai Elantra they believed was connected to the case, and they made small updates to their YouTube channel like this one.
Well, this investigation is not cold. We get tips every day that are viable. We get dozens and dozens of tips. We sort through them, we prioritize them. Eventually, we're going to narrow in on exactly what happened and who did it.
It was a shock then when police finally made an arrest on the other side of the country. The suspect, a man named Bryan Kohberger, a student at Washington State University, just a short drive from the University of Idaho and the crime scene. But Kohberger wasn't arrested in Washington State or even Idaho. Instead, he was arrested in Albrightsville, Pennsylvania, an unincorporated community in the Pocono Mountains. Kohberger, it turned out, was from the Keystone State, but he was studying at Washington State University. He was back home for winter break when he was arrested on December 30th, 2022. And here's where that new information comes in. After Kohberger's conviction and sentencing on July 23rd, hundreds of documents were released from the investigation, including this one. Now, it's written from the perspective of Moscow police detective Brett Payne, who made his way to Albrightsville, Pennsylvania on December 29th, 2022, just one day ahead of Kohberger's arrest. And here's straight from the court docs, quote, "After several coordination meetings, Detective Gilbertson, S.A. Shirley, and I drove to the Pennsylvania State Police Barracks at Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania, to await the arrival of Kohberger after his arrest and to interview him upon his arrival." Remember that name, Detective Gilbertson, because it's going to come up a lot in this interview. Now, after investigators were ready to go, the warrant had been executed at the Kohberger's home, Bryan Kohberger was arrested, then the interview began. At approximately 0200 hours on December 30th, 2022, Kohberger was brought to the PSP Stroudsburg Barracks and placed in an interview room. The interview was recorded on the built-in video system at the barracks, as well as Detective Gilbertson's pocket recorder. I have to pause really quick to thank Odoo for sponsoring this story. Odoo is a powerful all-in-one business management software that helps you manage everything from sales to accounting and, yes, manufacturing. Schedule your production, manage your assembly line, and fine-tune your work orders with Odoo, an all-in-one, easy-to-use platform. Need fully assembled manufacturing software that will put your business ahead of schedule? Odoo has you covered. Plus, Odoo's manufacturing app syncs seamlessly with your sales, inventory, and purchasing modules, so everything stays connected and running smoothly. Check out Odoo to take your manufacturing process to the next level and get a free 15-day trial today at odoo.com/lcnewsmanufacturing. When Kohberger met the investigators, right away he said something kind of bizarre. When I stated who I was, Kohberger stated, "You do look familiar," meaning Bryan Kohberger already recognized Detective Payne. More on that later. Before the interview even began, Detective Gilbertson read Kohberger his Miranda rights advisement. Detective Gilbertson asked Kohberger if he understood his rights, to which he replied he did. And then the questions started. Detective Gilbertson asked Kohberger about the SWAT operation at the house, to which Kohberger replied he was concerned about his parents and his dog. After that, conversation switched to small talk, specifically Kohberger's education and his field of study. Detective Gilbertson asked Kohberger if he was going to Washington State University, to which he replied he was. We made small talk with Kohberger about sports for some time. Kohberger stated he didn't follow WSU football much, but was a baseball fan. Detective Gilbertson asked Kohberger if he had only been at WSU for one semester. Kohberger confirmed this and said he came to WSU with his father on July 1st. Kohberger then went on to say he was a first-year PhD student in criminal justice and criminology. Detective Gilbertson asked Kohberger what the process was to apply for a PhD. Kohberger stated he applied to two places, UC Irvine and WSU. Kohberger said he was going to graduate with his master's in criminal justice from DeSales and was inspired. Kohberger then asked if it was okay to engage in small talk like we were, to which we replied it was. After briefly mentioning he was strengthened by the fact his mother and father were okay, Kohberger said he applied to the two aforementioned schools because they did not require the GRE exam. Kohberger then spoke about the GRE for a brief time and then said he was accepted by WSU. Detective Gilbertson then asked Kohberger what led him down the road of becoming a professor. Kohberger stated it was because he loved being in college and stated knowledge was far more important to him than money. Kohberger added WSU had a good program to study under, and then said, "You guys know all about this more than likely." Before going on and reading more court docs, I want to pause here and note, it was Kohberger himself who brought up the University of Idaho. Kohberger then asked questions about University of Idaho and other Idaho universities before stating he didn't know much about Idaho or Washington and had not left the tri-state area much. Kohberger then returned to speaking about his focus on learning and how he thought he could obtain a doctorate degree. So from here, the conversation switches back to Kohberger's education in Pennsylvania. He studied at both DeSales University and Northampton Community College before he ever moved out west. So investigators asked about all of that and Kohberger's fascination with crime. Detective Gilbertson then asked Kohberger about his time at DeSales University. Kohberger spoke for some time about his time at Northampton Community College and DeSales. Kohberger then spoke about how he became interested in criminal justice and stated he thought about being a police officer, but did not want to make that commitment unless he was absolutely sure. Kohberger then continued to speak about his education and universities. Kohberger also spoke more about the process to get into a PhD program and how competitive it can be. And then the topic switched to Kohberger's study at Washington State University. Detective Gilbertson then asked Kohberger about his move to Washington. Kohberger said he drove across country and wanted the challenge of driving across country and experiencing it with his father. Kohberger then said he took a different route back home with his father for Christmas break to avoid snow. Kohberger spoke about his travels and the risks of such travels in winter. Kohberger then began to speak about the beauty of the environment and its relationship to God and a higher power. We spoke about this for some time, and Kohberger said he was raised Christian but was always a skeptic, except when confronted with the beauty of the natural world. Detective Gilbertson asked Kohberger if he had ever been to the Pacific Northwest prior to coming to WSU, and Kohberger said he had not. Kohberger told investigators he worked as a TA at school and was also involved in the Pullman Police Department back in Washington. But after this, the small talk stopped. Kohberger made a demand. Kohberger then stated he understood why we were engaging in small talk, but would appreciate it if we explained to him what we were doing there. Detective Gilbertson asked Kohberger why he thought we were there. He said he wanted Detective Gilbertson to tell him. Detective Gilbertson said we were there because of what occurred in Moscow, but did not provide any further detail. Detective Gilbertson asked Kohberger if he watched the news. Kohberger said, I watched the news. Detective Gilbertson then asked Kohberger why he thought I looked familiar. Kohberger said he wasn't sure and stated I had a familiar face and looked like someone he used to know. Detective Gilbertson then said we were there because of what happened in November, just off the University of Idaho campus. Detective Gilbertson asked Kohberger if he knew what that was, to which Kohberger replied, Of course. When prompted to elaborate, Kohberger said it was the incident we had been investigating for how long has it been? Kohberger said there were probably several incidents and then said he was aware of a homicide because of a WSU alert he received. Detective Gilbertson asked when Kohberger received the alert. Kohberger said he wasn't sure, but thought it was sometime the previous month. And it was around this point that Kohberger actually asked for an attorney. Detective Gilbertson confirmed that was why we were there and asked if Kohberger wanted to talk about that. Kohberger replied, Well, I think I would need a lawyer. Kohberger then asked if we would explain to him what we were there for specifically and added he was tired. Detective Gilbertson again stated we were investigating the homicides of the 4 students and that we had questions and things we hoped Kohberger would help us understand. Kohberger sat back and said he had the utmost respect for law enforcement, but stated it was a constitutional right to speak to an attorney. Detective Gilbertson affirmed this. So Kohberger wants an attorney and the questioning stops, right? Well, not so fast. Kohberger then re engaged and said the only thing he heard from Moscow was an alert that came to his phone. Kohberger then said he wanted to talk to an attorney. Detective Gilbertson said we would stop now because Kohberger wanted to speak to an attorney. Kohberger then asked where his parents were and where his dog was. Kohberger re engaged again and asked what questions we would have for him. Detective Gilbertson then asked Kohberger again if he understood his rights and asked specifically what Kohberger wished. Kohberger asked what specifically we wanted to talk to him about and the reason. I told Kohberger he invoked his Fifth Amendment rights and we were not going to ask him any further questions. Kohberger asked again for the reason he was there, but added he would like to talk to an attorney. At this point, we concluded our interview with Kohberger and left the room. So we broke down all the court documents, but now I will read in between the lines and get some more information. So for that, we're going to turn to today's expert guest, retired NYPD detective Tom Smith. Tom, I want to start kind of at the end of the interview because this is what's most intriguing to me. Bryan Kohberger basically says, I have my constitutional right to have a lawyer. I want to lawyer up. But then he kind of backtracks and is like, wait, what do you want to know? What do you want to talk about? What's going on? So he says he wants a lawyer, but then he wants info too. What's your reaction to that?
Yeah, that's actually classic. It's called leaking, which when you have the inability to keep something inside you, and when you are dealing with people like this, school shooters, mass murderers, whatever it might be, they have an inability to just keep it all inside them. So they have to let little pieces out as sort of a relief. And that's exactly what he's doing. He's actually propping himself up to that serial killer kind of mentality of, if they don't know who I am, I'm not famous. Sort of like, and that's the way he's going, and that's the road he's going down of, yeah, I need to be quiet, but what do you know about this? And what do you want to ask me? He can't help himself because that's what they are and that's how they're built. And that was a classic, just leaking, part of bad guys.
Do you think it's more that he wanted to know what police knew in terms of the investigation so he could kind of be one step ahead? Or do you think it's because he's proud of what he's done?
A little of both. Absolutely a little of both. And that's exactly the way I read it, also, just as you stated it. What do they have? What do I have to come up with? What's the next line I need to say? But it's so hard. And I gave the detectives so much credit for sticking to, nope, we're done. You're finished. You invoked your amendment rights. That's fine. And he kept coming after you. You need a lot of discipline to continue to walk away from it and not throw something at him. So I gave the detectives in that interview a ton of respect and admiration for doing that, because that is very hard to do, especially if you're pretty convinced you got your guy.
Oh, absolutely. Because They did the Miranda rights, they were following protocol, but then all of a sudden he says he wants his attorney. Maybe he's going to give us something more. I mean, I would struggle not asking more questions and getting more answers, but they're thinking 10 steps ahead when and if this goes to trial. We don't want this thrown out. So you're right. Great work to the detectives on their part. And actually, I kind of want to go back now and talk about them because this happened literally all over the country. So the murder is obviously in Idaho. He's arrested in Pennsylvania. So we have multiple jurisdictions there. Plus the FBI is involved in all of this. So how does that work when we have these jurisdictions from, again, all over the country working together to come and get Kohberger and interview him? How does that work?
Just a lot of communication and a lot of planning and strategizing. I've had to do it, and it takes, that's all it is just getting everyone on the same page and open communication of what's going on, so no one's overstepping, no one's stepping on each other. Everyone has their role in what they're doing, and it worked out well. It started, on one coast and went through the surveillance of him traveling around the country and then ended up in Pennsylvania. And that's all it is. It's just coordination and making sure no one's going to be the hero. No one's going to overstep what they're doing. Just stick to the game plan and get the end result is what we all want. And you were exactly right in what you said before. The planning of the trial starts in the very beginning of this case. And you never want to do something wrong to jeopardize that. As much as you want an answer or as much as you want to find a piece of evidence, you have to do it all the right way because all of that leads up to the prosecution. You don't want anything going wrong in a trial.
All of these detectives are playing the long game, right? Because
Mhm.
this happened in December of 2022. We're now in July 2025, and now we finally have a conviction. I mean, it's been years in all of this. So you're right. They really have to be thinking ahead. And that kind of leads into my next question. When they're going to prepare for this interview, how do they do that? I mean, it could go multiple ways. He could say, yes, I want an attorney, which is eventually what happened. We did get some details, but he eventually says, I want an attorney. Or he could be an open book and say, here's what happened, or he could be hard to break. I mean, how do you prep for an interview where you don't know what's going to happen?
Yep, you know what? That's the relationship between partners. And I'm sure they have done it numerous times. And that's what you just strategize. Who's going to take what role? Who's going to be kind of the lead question, detective in this? Who's going to take the lead on this? That's all coordination and relationship and personalities you have with your partner. There may be, and this happens quite often, you have a suspect in a room that gravitates towards one of the detectives. That happens often. So you need to just think real quick. And if you have to switch roles right away, that's part of it. And I'm sure they were prepared for every scenario because you game planned it. And exactly what you said, Sierra. What if he says this? What if we go down this road? What are we going to do? And I'm sure even in the beginning, they were a little surprised of how much he was talking and not just as soon as you walk in the room, I want a lawyer. So again, it's relationships, it's experience when you're questioning suspects like this and how the interview goes.
Talking to your point about gravitating toward one of the detectives, I feel like we might have seen this a bit here. Right when they opened it up, came into the interview room, one of the detectives who this document was written from his perspective, Detective Payne, Kohberger says he looks familiar. And later on, we find out Kohberger watches the news. Now, Payne is obviously involved in this investigation. He's, some would say, a face of it. He's at least one of the faces of it. So we've got twofold here. The fact that he recognizes this detective who's obviously involved in a major murder investigation, number one. Number two, he's watching this news coverage. I mean, not only is it local in Idaho, it's across the country. It's in Pennsylvania. We're covering it here on Law&Crime. I'm in Pennsylvania when all of this happens. I mean, everyone's all over the place following this. So what does that say about Kohberger that he's been following the news of this case?
Paying attention to detail and wanting, the details of what's being said out there. The news is a great resource, if you're a bad guy, because, sometimes they overstep what they should be saying and where the investigation's at. And that goes with sources and all that stuff. But that is research. That's what it is. And, it brought me back to a very well known case, the Night Stalker. Richard Ramirez knew who the detectives were who were looking for him. And as soon as they caught him, that was the very first thing Richard Ramirez said to Gil Carrero. Oh, I know you. Same exact thing. So that's why when he said that, it brought me back to that case of how that thought process works.
So this guy's been following the news coverage of it, obviously. And another major point of contention in this case is that Bryan Kohberger he went to multiple different universities. Eventually, he was studying his PhD in criminology, which he talked about being a police officer. Even in this very interview, he said, yeah, I considered it. He's going through and studying, what makes a person commit a crime, what happens in the investigation. This is very interesting. And I think something a lot of people point to in this specific case is it that Bryan Kohberger wanted to carry out the perfect crime and see he could get away with it. I mean, his interest in the criminology really does stand out to me. What do you make of it that he's talking about it in this interview?
Yeah, a couple of things. One is, hey, I'm like you. I'm just like you guys, just want to, do the right thing and be a cop and go after bad guys. So we're all the same. And the other thing is, like you said, what goes into it? How is evidence collected? How are interviews conducted? How are investigations conducted? To set yourself up as a point of resource in a future act. So I think both of those things were going on at the same time. And the other thing I think that was going on was him just bragging about his education of, look, I'm no dummy. I'm really smart. I know what I'm doing. You're not going to, outthink me. I'm going for my PhD. So I think a lot of that resonated as far as I was concerned reading that of you're not smarter than me.
It's interesting based on Bryan Kohberger, what I've researched about him in the years since this happened. What you're saying checks out to me, that he was very confident in his smarts, that he's going, to get his PhD and all of that. You're not smarter than me. That makes sense to me now. But it's also interesting that now we have a person who's been convicted of 4 murders. So how smart was he and all of that? Anyway, that's a completely side note. One of the other questions I had about all of this is kind of speaking of study, he mentioned he went to WSU. There was some talk about that. But then Bryan Kohberger himself, also brought up the University of Idaho, which of course we know these 4 victims were students there. So it's interesting and a bit telling to me that he would bring up the specific university. What did you think about that?
That's the leaking part again. That's just an inability to stay quiet about something that he knows is important to him. And that was classic. It's just little pieces that they put out there that skilled and experienced detectives will jump on. The bad guy may think nothing of it, just because it's a conversation, something that's on their mind. But to someone with experience and a detective like that, that is a absolute red flag that jumps up when bad guys voluntarily give information about a crime that maybe no one knows about, or it's not really relevant in the interview that's taking place right now. Those are all red flags, and hats off to the detectives for making a note of it and understanding what he was talking about.
This reminds me of in many cases where we see they're looking for someone's missing, they're looking for a suspect, and investigators go out there and say, any information could help us. You may think it's irrelevant, but please come forward with it. And I think that could be something here too, because they do a bit of small talk for a while too. They talk about the weather, they talk about the road trip all the way from Washington State over to Pennsylvania. I mean, they're talking about things that you and I would talk about at coffee, but I mean, there could be some things in there. I guess that leads into my question. Why would they be starting with all of this small talk? They're not, slamming the papers on the table and saying, we know you did it. They're saying, oh, it was just Christmas break. It's about to be New Year's. What's going on with you and your family? I mean, tell me about the small talk part.
Yeah, that's a strategy. And I used it every interview I did. I started off interviews talking about the New York Yankees or the Knicks or the Rangers or whatever the sports were going on in New York at the time. That was my thing, and my partner knew it. I would start off 15 minutes talking about sports because what does it do? It just brings the person down into just a normal sense of a conversation. Then you start with the little bit of what the interview is actually about. I did that all the time. And most of the time, 90+% of the time, it worked because you need to get someone calmed down. You don't know their state of mind. You don't want to walk in there to a circus and a just emotional mess. You don't want to do that because you need to get information. Remember, the point of the interview is to get as much information as possible. So if you walk in just breathing fire and all over the place, they're going to shut down. It's not going to work. So it's a finessing thing that takes place in order to get what you're looking for. And I think they did a great job at that. And if you read the rest of it worked, because he did open up about the traveling and where they went and how he was acting and all that. So that strategy worked very, very well.
I think you're right. He did open up. Maybe if it seems like, oh, we just were going on a drive, our trip, it was winter break, whatever. But of course, investigators are following along on that. And if and when it comes to trial, we're going to need to track exactly where he went from Washington, the drive over to Pennsylvania. It's so incredible for me to see because on its face, it does look like small talk. But the way that you're pointing it out and the way that it was described in the court documents, it really shows that these investigators were ahead of the game, that they really had planned everything out. What do you think is the most important thing to take from this interview?
I think a lot of it, you can't write down on paper. Me as an investigator sitting in that room is how is he acting? What emotions are coming out of him? What question did he kind of jump back on or flick his eyes more or move around in his chair more? So that's hard to explain on, a document. But that's one of the things I would like to see with that interview of just his actions, because that speaks volumes into what they're thinking or the reactions that they're getting from certain questions. But I think overall, with an initial interview of someone that's sitting in front of you that is suspected of killing 4 kids, they did a masterful job with doing what they had to do at that point.
You're right. From this, we can't really tell. Was he kind of quiet and
Mhm.
reserved? Was he loud? And, yes, I traveled from Washington. Say, what was his personality like in all of this? It's basically just the facts as they're laying them out. And I guess one thing I could tell from all of this about Bryan Kohberger's personality and kind of what he was exuding in all of this is two things. He said that he was wondering about his parents. There was a SWAT situation at his home when he was arrested. How are my parents? Asking about them, asking about his dog. So he mentioned all of that kind of selfishly thinking about those things. And then additionally, he basically demanded, okay, enough is enough. We've done the small talk. What do you want me here for?
Mhm.
So to me, it seems kind of self-serving in a way. Did that stand out to you?
Oh yeah, that goes to the narcissistic, hey, I'm the superstar now, I'm the celebrity. Hey, what do you want from me? I'm the center of attention right now. And that statement and that question of him would absolutely light me up as an investigator. Because, like I said, they're extracting information from you. What do you need from me? What do you need? Yeah, I don't need you. You need me. And
Mhm.
that's his attitude with this interview, especially that question. That's a great point, Sierra.
Now, something else in all of this is we have the court document to go through and read. However, at the top, it does state multiple recordings were taken of this, which I assume if it did go to trial, I'm sure we would hear excerpts from it. But now, me, Sierra Gillespie, the reporter, is wondering, when am I going to get to see these? If they're audio, when am I going to get to hear them? So, do you think they will one day be released now that we have a conviction? There's been a sentencing, the case is essentially over?
Yeah, I think they will, because it doesn't serve any purpose at this point if he's away to not release them. You don't want to make him more of a celebrity than he already is. I get that
Mhm.
point. I don't know if they would have to inquire or ask the victims' families if they would be okay with releasing it. I don't know the procedures of that court of what they or the police department what they would have to do to release those, but I think at some point they're going to come out. I also think at some point he's going to give an interview. At some point to somebody, he's going to understand who he is, what this was all about, and that celebrityism that he's craving is going to come out at some point.
It's so sad that we have such media attention around Bryan Kohberger,
Mhm.
and you're right. I do think he loves it. He seems to love the celebrity and maybe one day would do that interview. But I think we have to remember the victims in all of this, their families, what they had to go through and endure every single day since then. It's just such a tragic case to have to go through. Tom Smith, thank you for coming on, though, and walking us through the first interview Bryan Kohberger had with police.
Absolutely, always a pleasure, Sierra. Thank you.
After his police interview, Bryan Kohberger was extradited to Idaho. At first, a judge entered a not guilty plea on his behalf, and we expected his trial to begin next month. But in the final hour, Kohberger changed his plea to guilty. Just this week, he was sentenced to 4 life sentences in the murders of Kaylee Gonzalez, Madison Mogan, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin. This is overall a devastating case, honestly, one of the more heartbreaking ones we've had to cover here on Law and Crime. So while it's our duty to bring you the facts of this case, our hearts still go out to the families and friends of the victims. For all the latest updates in this case and all others, make sure to follow our channel. It's Scandalous News, and you can send any tips our way too at scandal@lawandcrime.com. Thanks for watching today's episode of Scandal. I'm your host, Sierra Gillespie, and I'll see you next time.